Thank you all for being here today. I am really honored to be presenting this keynote. I want to thank Nobility for inviting me, and a special shout out to Mariela Paulino, who is an amazing leader in this space, as well as a friend. My keynote today is titled, "The Future of Work Must." Today's keynote is titled, "The Future of Work Must Prioritize Disability Inclusion." To give a visual description of myself, I am a light-skinned Latina woman. I have dark brown wavy hair that is swept to one side over my left shoulder. I'm wearing dark brown glasses, or glasses with a dark brown frame, and a red shirt with short sleeves. Behind me is a virtual background with the Blindish Latina logo in multiple columns and rows. And the logo has a bold black eye with the words @Blindish Latina written in all caps in black text. I'm an expressive person. I smile a lot and I speak with my hands. My pronouns are she, her, ella. And for land acknowledgement, this presentation was created on the traditional stolen lands of the Piscataway and Nacotchtank or Anacostan people. I always share that my perspective does not represent all disabled people or all women or all Latina people. This is my perspective. So today I'm going to be sharing some personal stories with you. Before I do that, I wanted to share a few photos to invite you in to my story. This is me as a young girl. I'm about 7 years old, and I have a sweet smile on my face and bangs, which I hated. My ears are pierced with little earrings, and this is very common in my culture. I got my ears pierced when I was a baby. This next photo shows my mom. My mom is an immigrant from Cuba, and she came to the US when she was 8 years old. She's holding my younger brother, who's just a little baby, and I'm a toddler looking up with a warm expression on my face. And we are sitting on a bed, which I believe is from the 70s. It's got a mirror trim, so I like to call it the disco bed. This photo showed me and my father. My father is wearing a white shirt, white pants. He's got kind of puffy black hair and a big mustache. My father is Nuyorican or Puerto Rican from New York, and he grew up in the South Bronx. His parents are from Puerto Rico. Okay, so now I'm going to stop sharing the slides, and we are going to talk together more closely. So just bear with me a moment. Okay. So we're all here at this conference to focus on the theme of digital inclusion as our new normal. I'm Catarina Rivera, a public speaker and DEI consultant focused on disability inclusion in the workplace. Now that I've shared these photos with you, I've stopped sharing my screen because I want to appear larger. For anyone who lip reads, I hope this is helpful as well. I've been disabled my whole life. I was born hard of hearing, but my parents didn't know why I was hard of hearing or needed hearing aids. When I was 17, I was diagnosed with Usher syndrome, which provided those answers. It was unexpected. After my diagnosis, I started to deal with having a progressive vision disability as well, and what that meant for me and my life. I'm also Cuban and Puerto Rican, and my Latina identity is a really important part of who I am. I founded Blindish Latina because I wanted to share my story of being a disabled Latina woman. I wanted to be the representation I myself did not have. Many people don't know a lot about disability and are uncomfortable even saying the word. But we need to say the word, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with disability. You'll be hearing me say the word at least 40 times today. With my Instagram account, Blindish Latina, I wanted to become everyone's disabled friend, just in case they didn't have anyone openly disabled in their life. It is said that knowing just one person of an identity group reduces prejudice and bias. On a regular basis, I receive messages and comments from people thanking me for educating them, for helping them to learn something simple that they can do to include others. I realize now that I've come full circle because I started my career as an educator, not for adults, but for elementary school students. My first job was as a bilingual elementary school teacher in the Bronx. I wanted to give back to Latine students who didn't have the same privilege that I had. I grew up in suburban Maryland in a house with a yard with two parents who had graduate degrees and were English dominant. My students were recent arrivals to the country or those who had been here a while and hadn't yet tested out of bilingual education. When I started teaching at 21 years old, I came in with big dreams and a big heart. I was ready to change my students' lives. And I was terrible. I was not a good teacher. I didn't know what I was doing. If I told my students to do something and they didn't do it the first time, I just looked around nervously and felt powerless. I remember asking a colleague to come observe me and give me tips because the principal was watching me, letting me know that she would fire me if I didn't shape up. So I had a few students sitting in a circle with me on the rug for a small reading group. I asked Noel to put his hands in his lap, and he did it. The teacher observing me said, "Catarina, you need to watch him do it. And if he doesn't do it, say it again. Let him know you actually expect him to listen." That advice changed my life. I didn't realize I wasn't actually holding my students accountable to the expectations I had for them. I didn't truly believe that they would listen to me. And they were getting the message that they didn't have to. Once I started implementing this change, along with many others, I gained confidence as a teacher and even kept my job. We need to do the same with companies and organizations. Hold them accountable for including disability in their work. Why is disability inclusion so important in the workplace? Why should inclusion be the default? Well, not everyone knows they have a disability. Many people are not diagnosed yet. And disabled people who know they have a disability but are not open about it can still receive support in an inclusive workplace. By creating overall disability inclusion, you support all your employees. My own journey to owning my disability took years. I didn't want to use a white cane for a long time because I didn't want to appear disabled. I would rather bump into things, walk slowly, and try to play it off if I had any challenges. When I lived in New York City, I would often attend networking events with my friends. At one of these events, I remember standing in one spot, not feeling comfortable moving around the room. The place was dark and noisy. Everyone was chattering around me. Someone came up to me and introduced themselves. I tried 2 times to hear what their name was, and then I gave up. Later, my friend told me that someone else was trying to talk to me, and then they walked away. What did that person think of me? They probably thought that I was rude, that I ignored them. The assumptions are usually negative ones. They had no idea I was disabled. One time, a friend of mine brought someone over to speak to me and then left without saying anything. I was speaking with this man for a while, but I couldn't hear him very well. I noticed he was blinking his eyes a lot and asked him if everything was okay. Later, my friend so excitedly asked me what I thought of him and what we talked about, us both being Latino and blind. My jaw dropped to the floor. I had no idea he was blind. She hadn't said anything. While speaking with him, I was so focused on his face and with this little box of vision that I have, I didn't see that he was holding a white cane. And how awful I must have come across. Commenting on his eyes, I was very embarrassed and also sad that I missed that moment to have a conversation with another blind person in that setting. Even I, as a disabled person, didn't assume disability about someone I had just met. With my work as a public speaker and DEI consultant, one of my missions is to activate disability inclusion in the workplace. My upcoming TEDx talk will be on this topic. We're building a world together where disability is seen as an integral part of diversity, equity, and inclusion work, also known as DEI work. We're not there yet. Unfortunately, disability is often left out of DEI and is often not thought about. According to a March 2020 Harvard Business Review article, although 90% of companies claim to prioritize diversity, only 4% consider disability in those initiatives. I hope the percentage is higher now, but I know we still have a lot of work to do. I work with many corporate clients, and many times I am the first speaker they've ever had to speak on disability. There's a great amount of privilege that comes with being non-disabled. Non-disabled people don't see the world the same way disabled people do. They don't see the obstacles and the challenges we face, the lack of inclusion, and how much time and emotional energy it takes to navigate inaccessible situations. I remember a holiday party at work, which was supposed to be celebratory. It was supposed to be fun, coming together with all my colleagues to celebrate during the holiday season. For me, as a deaf blind woman with limited vision in dark spaces, it wasn't something I was looking forward to. It wasn't a space where I felt comfortable. And the whole space was dark. It was 7 o'clock, and I had reached the point of no return. I was really, really hungry. I needed food. I know there are people here who can relate to that urgency, that need. I knew there was a buffet that was being set up. The buffet area was not well lit at all, and I could not see the food. I asked a friend of mine that I worked with, a colleague, to please help me get a plate of food. This was his first time helping me with something like this. He would tell me what the item was. I would try to shine my cell phone flashlight on it, and he would put some on my plate if I wanted it. This could have raised eyebrows around me. I was aware that there were many other colleagues around me who did not know about my blindness and would not understand why he was making my plate. because I was often in a well-lit environment in the office, and I knew the office layout completely. I did not need to use my white cane in the office. I hadn't made a grand announcement to everyone that I had only about 5% of my vision remaining. But in this context, I really couldn't see. That's an obstacle that non-disabled people probably didn't think about when planning this party. And it ultimately led me to feeling less included and less connected to my coworkers, which was the opposite of the company's goals and intentions for this event. Disability inclusion needs to be prioritized within all companies and organizations. Why? There are 3 key myths we need to address that block leaders from focusing on disability. The first key myth is that leaders don't think there are many disabled people in the world. That's absolutely not true, of course. Intersectionality means that anyone can be disabled and anyone can become disabled at any time. Disability is an identity that anyone of any race, any religion, any socioeconomic status, any age, anybody can have. We are a very large group of people. According to the CDC, 1 in 4 adults in the United States has a disability. And that number is expected to be higher now due to the pandemic. Worldwide, over 1 billion people are disabled. The second key myth is that leaders believe they do not have disabled employees in their workforce. Because 79% of disabled employees do not disclose their disability to HR, oftentimes leaders and managers don't understand that they actually do have a lot of disabled employees in their workforce. Let me be clear. The problem is not a lack of disability disclosure. The problem is a lack of disability inclusion. The third key myth is that accessibility is something that can be focused on later. When leaders put off accessibility, they don't realize it's more expensive, more time-consuming, and more challenging to build it in later. They also fail to understand that accessible design is good design, as we've heard here many times. Addressing these 3 key myths within companies and organizations will help leaders start to understand the need to prioritize disability inclusion and accessibility. One area where I'd like to see progress is in the hiring of disabled talent. According to the US Bureau of Labor Statistics, disabled people are 2 times more likely to be unemployed compared to non-disabled people. There are real barriers to employment, from issues with maintaining benefits due to income restrictions, systemic barriers, and discrimination. Even though the ADA was passed in 1990 due to the efforts of disability rights activists, discrimination is still happening today. While it is illegal, it is not gone. For more on the disability rights movement, I love recommending the Crip Camp documentary on Netflix, which is also available for free on YouTube. I know Judy Heumann has spoken at Access U before. The ADA, unfortunately, has not eliminated discriminatory practices, and there's no enforcement mechanism built into the law. To enforce the law, individuals need to file lawsuits or Department of Justice complaints. While disabled job seekers are protected by the ADA, it can be nerve-wracking to engage in the job search process and know that discrimination is still possible. I want to share a story about the last job that I interviewed for before becoming an entrepreneur. In 2015, I found a community engagement job listing that was my dream job at a large nonprofit in New York City. The interview process had many rounds. I was surprised with the Spanish test, where someone was brought in to speak to me and make sure that I actually did speak Spanish. I was asked whether I knew the community that the position was related to, which was Washington Heights and Inwood. And I was able to answer yes. I had even started a nonprofit in the community. I had lived there for 8 years at that point. One of the interview rounds required me to create a presentation as if I was already in the role and to share information about the program. I went out into the community. I got quotes and photos from community members to include in my presentation. To sum it up, I was qualified for the role. I was actually overqualified. I was about to finish my second graduate degree in public health. Can you imagine if they'd assumed that I couldn't do the field work that was required for this role due to my disability? If they found out about my blindness, discrimination could have played a role in me not being hired. Oftentimes, there's an assumption that a disabled person can't perform a role instead of a discussion about how they would perform the role. Non-disabled people are not aware of all of our problem-solving skills, how we adapt, and how much we're able to do. I lived in that community. I knew that community, and my disability did not prevent me from doing an excellent job in the role and contributing to this employer for over 6 years of employment. I did need accommodations. I couldn't hear on the office phone at all, and it took months to find the right solution, which ended up being a pair of headphones and routing the calls through an application on my computer instead of the physical phone. The headphones cost less than $500. Many leaders assume that disability accommodations are expensive, but most cost nothing at all or cost less than $500. Disabled people who are employed often have to engage in advocacy or adaptation on top of our already full workloads. Let me give you an example. At the beginning of the pandemic, my employer at the time had Microsoft Teams available as our primary software for meetings, but a lot of departments were using Zoom for meetings instead. I assumed that people were more familiar with Zoom and were more comfortable with how to use it. However, Zoom did not have closed captions available at that time, so it was not accessible for me. Automatic closed captions were not integrated into their platform, while Microsoft Teams had captions available at the click of a button, and I didn't have to ask anyone to set it up. It was very frustrating for me to see Zoom meetings over and over again, especially for organization-wide town halls, where really important information was being shared. I didn't want to miss out or exhaust myself trying to understand everyone during these meetings. I had to do a lot of advocacy to try to change this situation, including writing a memo to the executive leadership team and meeting with the assistant to the CEO to explain the issue and provide information on a third-party captioning service that could be used. I also engaged with another colleague of mine, inviting him to be my ally and to support me. I said, if you see any Zoom meetings coming out from your department, can you please recommend that they switch to Teams? Because I'm tired of speaking up about this. I was the only one asking for this switch, and advocacy had become a stressful burden. I'm sure all disabled people have different versions of stories like this. Stories when we were left out, stories when we felt isolated, stories when no one seemed to care or understand us. Non-disabled people often don't know or understand that they are leaving disabled people out. It's a lot of work to create change. It's usually not just one conversation. I want to share another story of when I was an elementary school teacher in Harlem at a different school than my first one. When we would go on field trips, I was lucky enough to have multiple parents volunteering to attend the field trips with us. I remember we were going to the Apollo Theater on 125th Street. Going into a dark theater from a brightly lit sidewalk is difficult for me. It takes a while for my eyes to adjust to the change in lighting. And I was grateful that my students at the front of the line would help guide me. Over time, all my students understood that I needed help in certain situations. After a few field trips where the students were helping me, I decided that wouldn't it be even better to have a parent at the front of the line instead of me? I could be at the back of the line, which is much more supportive for my disability. I think there's this expectation that the teacher leads the line. The teacher is the one that needs to be there. But that's not really true. I wasn't an ineffective teacher because of my disability or because I wasn't at the front of the line. On the contrary, I knew my strengths. I deployed resources to assist me in addressing a challenge. By having my students learn about disability, see my adaptations, and talking to them directly and transparently, we built trust. We built understanding. We built a more cooperative culture in our classroom. Disabled people are amazing. We are problem solvers. We are creative. We are talented, and we need to be hired. Companies that harness the power of disability inclusion have better workplaces for everyone. They design better products. They retain their employees. Disability inclusion is not charity or compliance. It is a competitive advantage. A study from Accenture found that companies that are disability inclusive have 30% higher profit margins than other companies studied, and a sample of 140 companies across all industries. That's the power of disability inclusion. Companies and employers need to prioritize disability inclusion as part of the future of work. During every speaking engagement where I speak about disability awareness, share my story as a disabled Latina woman, and share best practices for inclusion, I hear the same messages over and over again from attendees. They communicate to me, I feel seen, I feel heard, I feel validated. There are many disabled people that have not had the opportunity to have their lived experience validated within the workplace. It's so important to not just focus on apparent disabilities or physical disabilities, but also on non-apparent disabilities, undiagnosed disabilities, chronic illness, cognitive disabilities, mental health conditions, and remember, multiply disabled people as well. We all hold multiple identities, and many of us do have multiple disabilities. I hope that my stories resonated for you today. I hope that you felt seen, heard, and validated. As we continue to spend time together at Access U, what can all of us do? All of us can remember the ideal world that we want to build. We can all make this commitment that the future of work must prioritize disability inclusion. Having a shared goal and coming together makes us incredibly powerful as a group. I encourage all of you to develop at least one connection with someone else that you take beyond this conference. If you want to connect with me, message me on the Access U Slack or via my website, CatarinaRivera.com. After this conference concludes, the work continues. Each and every one of us can play a role. If we're disabled, we can share our stories and lived experience. Lived experience is expertise. We can connect with other disabled people to advocate together for accessibility and inclusion. If we're non-disabled, we can take action and partner with the disability community to create more inclusive workplaces and greater digital accessibility. If you aren't a champion already, you can become a champion of accessibility and inclusion. To create change in the minds of others and make the case for accessibility, I have 6 tips for you. 1, use personal stories or real stories to build empathy. Empathy is powerful. 2, showcase what other companies are doing. Other companies who are stronger in accessibility, especially if they're getting media attention. No company leader wants to be behind. 3, articulate the business case and showcase the benefits. 4, invest in key decision makers over time. Keep talking to them, keep bringing them in. Have the mindset that it might take a long time for them to understand, but once they do, things will move more quickly. 5, bring in benchmarks or audits, if possible, to show them where they are. That can be very motivating when they get a low score. And number 6, harness the power of collective action. Connect with your colleagues to advocate together. Decision makers need to invest time, money, and resources into this work. Together, all of us can build a future of work where disability inclusion is valued, where accessibility is built in from the beginning, and where disability is seen as just part of the natural diversity of humankind. When all of us are included, we create a better world for everyone. Thank you. I hope you'll stay connected with me. I'm going to share my screen again in just a moment so that you have my contact information. And I will just ask that someone please put it into the chat as well and type it into the chat. So now we can spend the rest of our time together engaged in Q&A, and you might even stay on time with your conference schedule. So if you're attending virtually, you can raise your hand to participate or add your question to the chat box. In-person attendees, I believe, will have the opportunity to voice their question on a microphone. Keep in mind that I'm hard of hearing, so I might need questions typed to me as well in order to fully understand that. And also, if you are on this event as a support person, I also might need help elevating the questions as I'm navigating my screen. Okay, I've got the contact information up. I've added my website, my Instagram, Blindish Latina, and my LinkedIn. All right, now I'm going to check to look at the chat. Thank you everyone who tagged in the resources that I was mentioning and put the links. That was very helpful. Okay, great.
The mic is
Okay, I'm seeing a question in the chat. I'll take this as the first one, and let's go for this. Jonathan, what are some of the companies that you think are leading the way in disability inclusion? Okay, so definitely, and I think this will be no surprise to all of you, Microsoft. Microsoft is one of the ones that I love to highlight because they're doing so much, not only in hiring, they have a neurodiversity initiative that I think they've been a pioneer of. They also, of course, are doing so much work in product design and in the Ability Summit that's been running for, I think, 11 years now. That's wonderful to see. I also want to highlight Global Accessibility Awareness Day, which is next week. So that's a great opportunity within companies to do an event or to bring it in. And so that's a company that I always highlight. In terms of other companies, I don't know enough about their internal practices to really feel confident like highlighting another one. So I really look to Microsoft. But in terms of how can you find out, Disability In has an index called the DEI. I believe it stands for Disability Equality Index. And so there are companies that participate every year and they get a score. I believe the top scores are publicly shared. Now, if someone scores a top score on this index, it doesn't mean that they're perfect. There's, of course, limits to where that's going to get you getting a top score, but it is going to be an indicator that they're on the right path and that they've taken good steps towards greater inclusion. So I'm going to look at the next question from John. What is the cause of my disability? I have Usher syndrome. Usher syndrome is the leading genetic cause of combined deafness and blindness. My parents both passed a recessive gene to me, and my brother and I both happen to have Usher. Now, in terms of how that manifested, I shared at the beginning that I was hard of hearing from a young age. So since I was a toddler, I was wearing hearing aids, and I did not find out about my vision until 17 years old when I was diagnosed, because that's when it's very typical for the process to be that way, that when you're a teenager, you start to notice issues with peripheral vision and night blindness. But there are different types of Usher syndrome. There are, other ways that it manifests. So that is my disability, and my vision gets worse over time. So retina is deteriorating. And so that's it. I also just want to give a shout out to just how people come into contact with disability. A lot of us are diagnosed in the medical setting and then not given any resources, not given any advice on how to live with disability and how you can have a wonderful life still. And there's a lot of negativity and lack of support within the medical model. So I love the social model of disability. Okay, favorite successes from Lindsay. And please, the organizers, if there's someone in the in-person space that has a question, I want to make sure we balance both because that's important. Okay, Lindsay has a question. What are some of your favorite successes in my work and advocacy? Oh, I'm proud of what I was able to do. My former company, I started a employee group, what do we call it? Affinity group for disability. I opened it up to people who are disabled and allies, because sometimes remember that people are not open about their disability at work. So by opening up the group to people that are allies, even if someone didn't want to be open about their own personal disability, they could still join. The CEO joined, the head of finance joined, and so we had senior leaders in the group. And what we did was we had a lot of discussions. I would bring articles to them. I would bring things like when there was a disability advocate who had her power wheelchair damaged by, I think, United Airlines. And she unfortunately died because the wheelchair was damaged and they were refusing to get her a replacement. And that chair was customized to her body. So it's very important. It's very important that people have their custom chairs. So that was just devastating. And I was seeing so much activism within the community. So I brought that to my workplace. And I don't think that my colleagues would have known about this story. I don't think they would have heard about it. So that bringing that kind of awareness and like seeing the change, that's a big deal for me. I'm also really proud as an advocate to be able to start a business and launch it and work with so many amazing companies. Within 1 year, I was able to leave my full-time job, which was a big personal accomplishment. So I'm looking forward to the impact of my TEDx talk because it is about disability inclusion in the workplace. I really am trying to create a mindset shift across in the industry, across all professionals. So I'm hoping that that will make a big splash. All right, I'm going to stop sharing the screen. Everyone has my information. Okay. Oh, no mic in the ballroom. Okay. All right. I talked about, next question is, I talked about not disclosing my disability and went out and got video testimonials for my presentation. At what point did I disclose my disability and how was it received? I disclosed my disability after I was hired, which is what disability employment lawyers recommend to do, if you can, to wait until after you are hired to disclose. And I believe it was like the first day on the job. And I just told my manager that I was hard of hearing and I would likely need some support with that. And that I believe I shared my vision as well, but I said it was really not going to impact my work. I did not anticipate needing accommodations for that. And that was mostly true. It's only in social situations outside of the office that things would come up. How was it received? I remember being so nervous to share because I felt like I was hiding something when really, I was protecting myself from discrimination. So flip that, but I did feel scared. Afterwards, I think I felt okay. I don't think she said too much. I think she was pretty welcoming to it. And, but what was frustrating for me is that the solution with the headphones took at least 5 or 6 months to happen. And I don't think that should have taken so long. Yeah, but I hear stories from disabled people all the time that there's just such a range of experiences. Some people have to fight to get accommodations and are really even denied accommodations. So there's a wide range of how people are received, but I'm hoping to see more acceptance and understanding. Yes. Okay, question from Lorna. While no one should have to report their disability, is it possibly more challenging for companies to address when they go unreported? How best to move forward when a company may not have the context needed? This is difficult. Yes, ideally having data would help. Knowing that percentage can help make the case. But I really try to stay away from that because I remember what it was like when I was first diagnosed. Every time I would talk about my disability in college, I would cry. I was so emotional. I would say, I'm going blind. It was really hard for me. So I really want to respect where people are with their disability journey. And it might not be safe for them to disclose. They might not feel safe to share with their employer. So when I make the case, I really try to get companies not to focus on disclosure and to focus on understanding the statistics overall. Like there's actually another stat I have that 30% of employees aged 21 to 65 working in white collar roles, I think, and they're college graduates, I think that's all of it. So 30% of that group is disabled. So just communicating that there are a lot of disabled people in the workforce. We need to work on disability because it's important. It just is. And using other data, using that to support the case. And if you create a welcoming environment and the company is a safe place and it's inclusive and you have the right leadership, then maybe you can work to have that be something that's supported when people disclose. The other thing that's important is executive leadership. Is there someone in executive leadership who is openly disabled? Because that makes a big difference too. I'm going to the next question. When and where is my TED Talk to be? Okay, so the TEDx talk that I have upcoming is on June 5th in Baltimore. On my Instagram, Blindish Latina, in my link tree, I have a link to the tickets. So if you're in the Maryland area, you're invited, you can come. It's on a Sunday. However, it's going to be available online to everyone about a month after the talk happens. So I believe it will be out at the end of June or the beginning of July. I'll share it online. If you join my newsletter, I'll share it there. So it'll be shared. Next question from Carlos. Do resources exist for adults with disabilities? For example, realizing having dyslexia as an adult, and most resources are for children. I'm gonna give a clap to that. Just, I see you, I hear you. Yes, I know that there are disabilities where that happens. You're looking for resources and you don't find something geared towards adults. The best advice that I would have is to connect with communities. Facebook groups might be a great one where you can connect with other people who have dyslexia, and then they're going to share resources with you. People have already done the research. It's great to connect with communities because then you're not feeling isolated and you can really help each other. I'm going to give a shout out to a community for women with ADHD called Kaleidoscope Society. That was founded by a very good friend of mine named Margot Jaffe. I've known her since college. She's incredible. So if you are an adult woman with ADHD, that's a community that you can join and get support from. So I know there are other efforts out there that you will be able to find. So I hope that by connecting with others, they would be able to direct you in that way. Now, if you are in the workforce, or you're even trying to support a disabled employee in the workforce, a hugely important and amazing resource is the Job Accommodations Network. AskJan, JAN.org. They have a hotline. You can call them. They have almost like an encyclopedia of accommodations that are common for different disabilities that you can go on their website and access. Many, many resources, and anybody can reach out to them. You don't have to be disabled. Follow up. How do you get companies to not focus on disclosure when they have to collect info as federal contractors? This is a specialized situation. Federal contractors, yes, have to collect information. So, and they need to maintain a certain percentage of their workforce to be disabled. So I would say that federal contractors are different because you know that they need this percentage, disclosing is to your advantage. And, but I don't know if what that means that their work experience will be totally inclusive. I just know that the disclosure is valuable to them. So how do you get companies to not focus on disclosure? And in that case, they would need to have disclosure, but then beyond that, I wouldn't want them to stop at it. Let's focus on inclusion. Let's focus on what are you doing as a company to make sure that everyone can thrive in your workplace. Okay, question. Has the accountability for companies gotten better? Has the ADA gotten more teeth to hold companies accountable if they are not providing reasonable accommodations? My view is that it has not gotten better. I would say that there are lawsuits that have been influential where companies have been sued because their website is inaccessible. And I think that has sent shockwaves through the industries and helped people to work on their website before getting sued, because that has been very public. But I don't think that there's been a kind of public reckoning for providing accommodations to individuals in their workforce. And I hope that we can see a better change in this area in the future. If you have a different viewpoint, I welcome it. Please share it as well in the chat. So I've reached the end of my questions, and I believe we are at the end of the time. I hope I have not missed any question. And thank you again to Nobility, to the team for having me. Thank you for everyone who has spent this time with me today. And I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.